Mike Schmidt, take us through your new reporting.
Well, what our reporting shows is that John Kelly was willing to go under oath to attest to what he saw, knew, and learned about when he was Trump's chief of staff. In November of last year, Kelly told us in an interview that he had witnessed Trump talking about investigating Comey, McCabe, Strzok, and Page. And this was significant at the time because we knew that Comey and McCabe had been the subjects of these highly unusual and invasive audits. And at the time, Kelly was saying, look, this is something Trump wanted to do. We were never able to connect Trump's desires to the fact that these audits and were conducted on Comey and McCabe. But what happened is that Strzok's lawyers saw what Kelly had said, and as part of their litigation, were able to get him to sign a sworn statement in which he says, yes, Trump did discuss this about Strzok and Page, and I have contemporaneous notes to back up what I'm saying. And one of these conversations happened in February of 2018.
Mike, take us through how it is that we're just learning about this today.
Well, we're learning about it because Strzok and Page are still fighting against the Justice Department in this lawsuit. They're trying to get the ability to depose Donald Trump under oath about what role he may have played in their firings, or the firing of Strzok, or the disclosure of their text messages. The judge in the case has said that they can do that, but the Justice Department is still fighting that. This filing came out in the course of that. Kelly says that he never acted on what Trump wanted, but this was Trump's desire. And it's just another example in sort of this pile of stuff where Trump was trying in any way possible to harness the powers of the federal government for his political ends and his political errands. This was him trying to use the law enforcement and investigative powers of the executive branch against his enemies. And in the case of Kelly, he's saying, look, Trump certainly entertained this idea, and it was something that he wanted.
And Mike, there's a difference between using the Justice Department against his enemies, which he also did with great relish, in the same pattern. He tweets something, and then we find out that DOJ moved pretty close to doing exactly what he wanted. The IRS is different. It's actually illegal. Is there any effort to refer potential illegality? Is there any investigation underway into Trump's, either it says directly or indirectly, ordering an investigation is illegal?
The only thing that we know about this is that after we reported last summer that Comey and McCabe had been the subjects of these unusual and invasive audits, that there was an Inspector General's investigation that looked into how Comey and McCabe were selected. And the Inspector General, this was supposed to be a random selection, said that they thought that the selection of them had been random, and they were essentially able to recreate how they were picked. Now, some Democrats that were briefed on that Inspector General's review were skeptical of it, but I don't know of anything else that the Democrats have done either in the House or the Senate since then to look further into this. The Inspector General's review looked at the narrow question of how these individuals were selected and sort of cleared the IRS and raised some other questions. It was a very sort of confusing report that came out, but it seemed to clear the agency of wrongdoing and how that was done. But we don't know what else anyone else has looked at in regards to this.
Andrew Weissmann, let me bring you in on this. Let me actually ask you a two-part question, because I know you shared with our producers that Trump's efforts to weaponize the federal government against anyone that was investigating Russia, it reached you. I mean, explain what happened with your background check.
Well, when I read Mike's reporting, I looked at the filing that was made in the lawsuit that is referenced. In other words, the lawsuit where Pete Strzok and Lisa Page are suing for violations of the Privacy Act. And there are sort of two ways in which there are improper uses of the Justice Department. There is the one that you talked about, which is this idea of sort of sicking the IRS on political enemies, which is also a criminal offense if can be proved. The other thing that is that was in the notes that John Kelly had was this idea of pulling security clearances. This is something that got a lot of attention in the middle of 2018. John Brennan was the victim of that, and there was discussion of many other people, including Lisa Page and Pete Strzok and many others. And that just struck me as incredibly close to home because, well, I was serving on Director Mueller's team, and it was in the middle of August, the exact time that the news was breaking. I was subjected to a really unusual re-up of my clearance. The way clearances work is they last for 5 years, and at the end of 5 years, usually 6 or 7, when the FBI gets around to it, there's a re-up of your security clearance. Well, in the middle of the Mueller investigation, only 2 to 3 years into my clearance, in other words, way before it was up, I was subjected to a re-examination by the FBI, which I remember at the time being incredibly suspicious. And so when I saw Mike's reporting and those contemporaneous notes, it seemed pretty clear of how to connect those dots in terms of why I was subjected to that. But I also want to make it clear that what I was subjected to, well, it's indicative of exactly of Mike's reporting. It is by no means comparable in terms of the harm that Pete and Lisa suffered, and Andy and Jim. So I just don't want to make it. I don't want to make sure people understand. I'm not saying that my situation is comparable in terms of harm.
No, but I think it's important. We talk about these issues as though there's any open question. There is no open question. Trump weaponized the government, and he tweeted about it ahead of time, during, and after. And he's a candidate for president now. And I wonder, Andrew Weissmann, we talk a lot about asymmetry. We talk a lot about the slow process and the way the wheels of justice grind meticulously and deliberately with all the rights of the accused in mind. I mean, we are just learning now from notes that have been collecting dust in General John Kelly's, wherever he kept his stuff from the White House for years. This is someone barreling toward the Republican nomination. What are your concerns about how much we don't know about not just weaponization of the federal government, but things that may have been illegal acts?
So there is so much blame to go around here. One, I'm sure Claire will talk about, Congress and the House and the irony of the House conducting weaponization hearings when, as you said, it's blatant what the former president did and what he's asking to do as soon as he regains the White House, if he were to do so. But at the same token, there are people like John Kelly who needed to come forward, and many others who were witness to these horrific acts. It's way too little, way too late for people like him and Bill Barr and others who were witnesses at the time to both illegal and improper acts. And I guess the big picture is, even if there were not a criminal statute that said you cannot use selective prosecution in connection with the IRS, this is what it means to be a public servant. The reason for the Department of Justice to be separate, even though you legally are part of the executive, and the reason that you have a president now who understands the restraint that is required to be in a democracy, and you have someone running for office who was the former president who had a complete absence of restraint with the most dictatorial qualities. And if that is to be something that we do not want, everyone who was witness to that has to speak up now. It shouldn't require the bravery of an E. Jean Carroll, Lisa Page, a Pete Strzok to try and sort of ferret this out through drips and drabs.